Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the California wildfires. The big story we were talking about yesterday was this red flag warning and how it was going to impact the wildfires. Big thing that we were worried about was as those thunderstorms came through, the potential for new lightning fires starting, and then also how the gusty winds were going to impact our wildfires. And just based on some of the reports we've seen, again, we'll be diving into this throughout the course of this video, but we did have some new lightning fires start. Doesn't look at first glance like any of those have gone completely out of hand, and we did have some of those gusty winds from the thunderstorms bring some effects to our wildfires, but overall, looking at the satellite imagery, I would say this is almost the best I have seen California look in maybe a month at this point. Usually we have a giant smoke plume coming off of the Dixie. In the last couple of weeks, we've had the huge smoke plume coming off of the Caldor Fire. And as you can see, not all that much smoke being produced over the last few hours, which is very encouraging to see because whenever you get those thunderstorms coming through with that red flag warning, it's a big question mark on how it's going to behave. With our wildfires, we've seen it go both ways throughout this fire season where in some cases it can bring lightning, it can also bring some gusty winds which flare up the fires or start new ones, or it can bring some increased relative humidity, bring some moisture to the fires, and in some cases even some rain. So that's always the flip side of what's going to happen with those thunderstorms, and just looking at the satellite imagery, I would say that things ended up being on the good side of that thunderstorm impact throughout the day today. But with that being said, we do still have that red flag warning in effect until about 11 p.m. tonight. And with that being said, we do still currently have 3 of the top 20 largest wildfires in the history of California still burning. We also have 2 of the most destructive wildfires in the history of California still burning with the Dixie and Caldor. So we're certainly going to be taking a very close look at those fires throughout the course of this video, as well as the Monument and especially the Antelope too, because that was one that flared up yesterday. Going to be very interested to see how that one has changed over the last couple of hours because, again, at the start of this red flag, we did have some flare-ups on the Dixie and Antelope. We had some new evacuation orders yesterday, but overall looks like we're seeing much better conditions as of right now. So one thing that we always do is we can also look at the natural color fire. Usually when the fires are very active, you'll see areas that are glowing bright orange. Looks like maybe the river complex is the only area where we are seeing a lot of heat coming off right now. I'll remind you, yesterday, this entire northern spot on the Dixie Fire was glowing bright orange. It was moving at what looked to be maybe a mile per hour up on that northern edge. So much better conditions looking at California as of right now. Again, that was a big question mark with those thunderstorms coming through, how it was going to change the fires, and overall it looks like we're trending in the right direction, and just based on that satellite imagery, I'd say that's the best it's looked in maybe a month as of this point. But with that being said, you can see that red flag warning is still over the Caldor and Dixie fires, so we are still going to dive into these fires and also look at the area burned with the beginning of this red flag warning where we did have some flare-ups. So I think the first place that I want to zoom in is on the northern part of the Dixie Fire here. You can see this was an area that was under that red flag warning, and this was the area we were watching yesterday that just had a huge flare-up. You could see it looked about as active as we've seen any part of any wildfire throughout the course of this season. And looking at the most recent fire perimeter data, you can see where a large amount of that growth was right on the northern edge of the fire. I'll zoom out just so we can get our bearings again. Again, it's always hard to look at the Dixie Fire because it's such a large fire. I'll turn the red flag warning off just so we could see the perimeter a little bit better. On that northern edge, that's where it was the most active yesterday with those gusty winds. It was basically winds coming in from the south that were pushing that fire farther to the north. You can see we jumped over Highway 44 here, and I know the big area that they're focusing on right now is Old Station, really focusing on some structure protection. So better way to see that, I think, is looking at this map. Not so much this fire perimeter data right here, but it does give an idea where a lot of those heat signatures were yesterday. Now, I do like to flip between this one and one other way to look at this. So looking at where that fire perimeter is, where a lot of that heat activity was yesterday, you can see it was the northern edge of the fire that was fueled by those southerly winds. And then we go over here and we go to GOES detections. This shows us where there's currently heat coming off of the fire. And yesterday when we looked at this, there was bright red just in this entire area here and just a huge oval. And if we look at it right now, we, for the first time in maybe a month, do not see any heat on the northern side of the Dixie Fire and actually on any part of the Dixie Fire. Again, this isn't perfect data. It's based on satellite imagery picking up hotspots from space. So I always have a disclaimer when showing this map, but I will say this is the first time, I think since I started forecasting on the Dixie Fire, that we've looked at this map and not seen any heat detections. Just to prove that this map is still working, you can see some of those heat detections around the Monument Fire and the river complex right there. So again, amazing to see how much the Dixie Fire has calmed down in the last couple of hours and throughout the day today. I believe the big reason for that, we did get some light rainfall from those storms that came through, but even more so, we did have an increase in relative humidity as that moisture moved into California. So just looking back at the fire perimeter, two things that I'll point out. One is this eastern edge. This was a big concern a number of days ago and even into this red flag warning as well, where we had a massive amount of growth. It even crossed Highway 395 here on a couple of occasions, and you can see where we had a large amount of structures. This led to some new evacuation orders, but just looking at the fact that you don't see any of those stars, which show where the hotspots were yesterday, or any of those current heat detections, looks like this part of the fire has calmed down. Big reason for that, I would say, is because you can see that it moved into where we have the Beckworth complex right here. Again, it's labeled as the Sugar Fire, but I was reporting this one as the Beckworth complex. This is one of the first wildfires that we did follow throughout the course of the season. And you can see how it almost just fits in with the Dixie Fire, almost like a puzzle piece, where right when the Dixie Fire moved into the Beckworth complex burn scar, the Dixie Fire just stopped in its tracks. Two big reasons for that. One, you can imagine the Beckworth complex or the Sugar Fire cleared out a lot of the fuels in this area. So when the Dixie Fire moved into this area, there was no more fuels to burn. But then also, usually you have some containment lines right there that you're actually able to reuse for the Dixie Fire. It looks like that helped to calm down the eastern edge of the fire. But again, big spot that we're watching is still that northern section where there were some new evacuation orders put in place yesterday. I'll say the areas of the fire where I'm most excited to see is none of those recent heat detections occurring around Lake Almanor, Quincy, Janesville, or Susanville. So some of the top spots that we were looking at in previous videos are currently looking pretty good. But again, big focus right now is on that old station area, trying to do some structure protection there and hopefully calm the fire down even more in this location, get some containment around this area, because you can see how close a lot of those heat detections came yesterday to Old Station, where we do have a number of structures in that area. But again, greatest thing to see, I would say, is the current heat detections where you actually can't see anything on the Dixie Fire. First time I've looked at that map and shown that I think I've been covering the Dixie Fire for about a month and a half to maybe 2 months at this point. So pretty amazing to see that for the first time. We can thank that moisture that moved through the state over the last couple of hours. So when it comes to, we want to look at the Dixie Fire right here. So when it comes to the Dixie Fire, you can see we're at 950,000 acres, 59% containment. If we want to look at the progression map for how those acres have burned, you can see the blue color there where the fire started. Predominant wind direction is usually from the south to the southwest, so a lot of that growth on this fire has been to the north and the northeast. But where you see that reddish color, that's where the most recent growth was. You can see that eastern section that crossed Highway 395 that we were concerned about for a number of days there. And then also that northern section where you can see all of that growth that happened yesterday. And there should be a legend on here. So it looks like July 14th is when the Dixie Fire started. So yeah, we have been following this one for quite some time now. I believe almost 2 months at this point. But good to see that with that red flag warning, we're looking much better than I was expecting us to. Again, that was a big question mark as those very gusty winds and the possibility of some new lightning starts did come through over the last couple of hours. So most of that growth on the Dixie Fire recently was on that northern section there, but good to see based on the heat detection map and the satellite imagery, it looks like that has significantly calmed down from when we were looking at it yesterday. Now, when it comes to that containment number, you can see it's at 59% right there. Looking at the overall Dixie Fire map, it looks like almost the entire western and southern edge of the Dixie Fire in that black containment category around Lake Almanord. Great to see that black line right there, which means we're fully contained around Westwood. That finger that moved up towards Susanville, we're looking contained right there. Starting to see more of that black line around Janesville, so that's great to see there as well. And all the way north of Quincy and around Taylorsville as well. So a lot of the key spots that we were talking about in previous videos look like they're in fairly good conditions as of right now, with a lot of containment around some of our key spots. Now, where we have had the most growth recently, again, you could see that on this map where it's that eastern section and the northern section there. Not a big surprise, those are the areas of the fire where we're still uncontained, where you see that red line there. But the good news is I imagine they're reusing some of the Beckworth complex containment lines on this eastern zone right there. And then in the northern section, they should be seeing some help from the calming conditions that we have right now with that humidity that moved in throughout the day today and appears to have calmed conditions down on the Dixie Fire. But I know you can never take my word for it when I say that we're looking a lot calmer right now, because we do still have a large amount of evacuation warnings and orders in place. Again, too many for me to possibly go through, but I'll just show a quick snapshot of the map right here. So I'll flip those around one sec. So you can see where that red color is. That's where there are still currently some evacuation orders in place. And then that yellow color is where the evacuation warnings are in place. So even though the Dixie Fire is looking much calmer than in previous days and much, much calmer than we were seeing yesterday, we do still have a large number of evacuation orders in place. So always be sure to stay updated with the local resources, and I do put a lot of the most important links in the description of this video. Now, the other number that we never like to report on, but is always important to report on, is the structures destroyed. You can see that we are up to 1,329 structures destroyed and 1 fatality. So that was something that I didn't notice when I was doing my update and forecast yesterday. And that's actually the first time that I've noticed that. So again, I don't have too much information on that as of right now, but that is something I will definitely look into and include more information on in tomorrow's video, because the last I had checked, that was not the case. So I will try to find out more about that fatality and bring that information back to you. But when it comes to the structures destroyed number, one of the most useful things that you can do is go to the damage assessment report or the damage assessment map. And what you can actually do here is click into the Dixie Fire itself. For example, if you are worried about this northern section and where we had a lot of that growth yesterday, again, it takes a while for the damage assessment teams to bring back some of that information. But for example, you'll be able to just zoom in there, zoom in to where some of those structures are, see where you have red structures, that's where the structure is considered destroyed. Black structure is where it's reported as no damage. And then one thing you can do is actually click on the structure itself and then look at the photo of it as well. So I put the link for that in the description of this video, as well as many of the other links that we're looking at. So if you're interested in that, you can look in the description of this video where I have a lot of the good resources for finding information, not only about the Dixie Fire, but our other fires as well. But overall, I would say the summary for the Dixie Fire is it was a big question mark about what was going to happen with this red flag warning as it came in. And overall, I would say that it actually had a positive impact on us. So I say that not only because of the heat detection map we were looking at, but the satellite imagery as well. Certainly not seeing a huge smoke plume coming off the Dixie Fire like we were at this time yesterday. And again, I think the big reason for that was actually how that red flag warning ended up impacting us. So the big question mark there, we'll just go back over that fire weather forecast because it is still somewhat in play. It was this trough right here that was moving through the Pacific Northwest. As it was bringing some moisture in with it. And with that moisture, we had the threat for some thunderstorms, and we actually did end up seeing some thunderstorms. I don't know about you, but I actually was woken up this morning by some rainfall. Hadn't seen that in a number of months, so I was pretty excited, but by the time I could get my camera out to take some video, the rain had already stopped. So basically just some novelty rainfall there. But the one thing that it did bring to us, we'll switch on over to the relative humidity. The one thing that it did bring to us that actually helped us a lot on our fires was this increase in relative humidity throughout the day today. You can see we're at 55% right now. But earlier today, at a time when we're usually seeing relative humidity in the single digits to the low teens, we're actually maybe around 20 to 30%, which is much better than we usually see at this time, and that certainly helped to calm conditions down on the Dixie Fire as those thunderstorms came through. Again, we did have some new lightning fire starts. Last I checked, they were able to get a handle on most of those new lightning fires, but with that moisture that came in, it overall seemed like it calmed conditions down on our wildfire. Now, the other thing that it did bring was some gusty winds. That was another big part of the red flag warning, was how the gusty winds were going to interact with the fire. Did have some gusts today. I saw some observations more in the Caldor Fire area that reported 40 to 60 mile per hour gusts, but overall looks like the bigger factor with that red flag warning was the moisture that came in and apparently calmed the fires down. So overall, fire weather forecast ended up working in our favor, but we do still have that red flag warning in place until 11 p.m. tonight, so we will have to keep an eye on things as those gusty winds continue, and there is still always the chance for something to flare up. Now, that's also the case on the Caldor Fire, which we'll take a look at in a second, but I'll just take one pause to be able to take a quick sip of water. Alrighty, so I just remembered something as I was taking my little water break. I also have the incident report for the Dixie Fire because there's a few numbers that I want to point out here. One is, although I said a lot of good news about how Dixie Fire does look, I would say the best as it's looked in about a month, you can see that structures threatened is still over 2,000. So we are going to have to, again, continue to keep an eye on the Dixie Fire. By no means I'm saying that the fire is wrapped up. There is a long, long way to go, and routinely with the Dixie Fire, we see things flare back up again, especially when we start to see hotter, drier conditions return, which we should be seeing as we get into this weekend. That thunderstorm threat is gone, but as a ridge builds in, we will start to trend to warmer, drier conditions, which has the potential to flare things up again. Now, one other thing that I wanted to point out on this incident update is crews continue to use the Burlington Northern Santa Fe fire train to deliver 30,000 gallons of water each trip. This allows firefighters to refill water quicker and continue the firefighting efforts along the northern part of the fire. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. I always show the resources on the fire. I didn't actually in this video, but still over 4,000 personnel, 36 helicopters, and think it is pretty cool to see that we also have a train on the Dixie Fire as well. Now, the other thing that I always show in these videos is the Wharf S-Fire wildfire simulation. This basically forecasts what's going to happen on the Dixie Fire over the next couple of days, and This was the big question mark in the last couple of days, was how the model was predicting the fire was going to interact with the thunderstorms. I'd say it did a pretty good job predicting that growth on the northern edge here, which we did end up seeing yesterday. And then just going back to the beginning, so this is earlier today, starts at 5 in the morning. You'll actually be able to see some of those very erratic gusty winds come through the fire area. That was those thunderstorms coming through this area that the model was picking up on, but the model did an amazing job of not actually predicting any of the areas of the Dixie Fire flaring up as those gusty erratic winds came in. Again, that's fairly impressive of this model right here, to not be predicting any large growth with those gusty winds coming through, because it's always a big question mark with those thunderstorms. And as we get into the end of the forecast for tomorrow, it's very interesting just to go back and forth. It looks like the model is maybe predicting a little bit of growth on the northern edge of this fire right here, but overall much less growth than we usually see when we look at this fire. So I would say pretty great forecast by Wildfire Fire right there, to not show very much growth happening throughout the day today, which we ended up seeing. And the good news is it's continuing that trend for tomorrow, not showing much growth tomorrow as well. So I'm certainly going to keep my eye on it, because this season overall has been fairly unprecedented when it comes to what actually ends up happening. But good to see that conditions on the Dixie Fire as of right now look about as calm as we've seen them throughout the entire lifetime of this fire. And the Wildfire Fire wildfire simulation is predicting calm conditions throughout the day tomorrow as well. Now, with that being said, again, the Dixie Fire is still the number 2 largest wildfire in the history of California. What is going to be the big question mark is if it ends up taking over that number 1 spot. I was doubting it early on because we were seeing it calm down a number of days there, but it seems like every time this fire starts to die down, it then figures out a way to flare back up again. So it is still going to be a big question mark if it does become the largest wildfire in the history of California. To figure that out, we're just going to have to wait and see what ends up happening. And as always, I will... So it is called Wildfire Fire. So I've actually had a number of... I'm sometimes looking over at the live chat. My apologies if I've missed anybody's questions throughout this video. I've been trying to just get through the information because I do have another forecast coming up at KSPW. I'm at the station right now, so I'm trying to get through this report a bit faster, which is why I'm not looking at the live chat too much. But it is called Wildfire Fire. It is the wildfire model that we put forward from the San Jose State Fire Weather Research Laboratory, and I put a description for it in the description of this video, so you can find that, as well as a lot of these links that we're looking at as well, if you go into the description. So overall in the Dixie Fire, I would say the best we've looked in maybe 2 months since the fire started. But as always, fire always finds a way to flare back up again, so we're going to keep a very close eye on it over the next couple of days, because again, we do have those warmer, drier conditions coming in this weekend. Now, the other fire that we've been following very closely over the last couple of weeks is the Caldor Fire. Bit tricky to see what was going on in the Caldor Fire throughout the day today because of all those clouds that we had over the area. And I would say that actually sums up what kind of behavior we did have on the Caldor Fire. We did see some of those thunderstorms come through the Sierra Nevada throughout the early morning hours today. That did bring some moisture, did bring some thunderstorms, some new lightning fire starts. I did hear some reports that some resources were having to be pulled off of the Caldor Fire to be deployed to some of those new lightning fires that were starting. I believe maybe 5 new lightning fires were started, but overall, I haven't seen any reports that any of them have gotten out of control. But with those thunderstorms coming through, I did see some observations that we had 40 to 60 mile per hour winds on the Caldor Fire. So going to be very interesting to see what that fire looks like right now when we look at some of our other maps. So just zooming out on this map, I do want to show what was the big story for the Caldor Fire over the last couple of days. It was a similar story that we were worried about with the Dixie Fire. You can see the fire perimeter there, and that pink color covering it which represented that red flag warning. And again, this did bring some challenges. We had some gusty winds. We did have some new lightning fire starts around this area, which pulled off some of the resources. And I do know some of the containment lines were threatened throughout the Caldor Fire, throughout the day today and yesterday. But overall, if we compare the Caldor Fire for what it looks like right now compared to what it looked like at about this time last week, and especially last Monday and Tuesday, much better conditions on the Caldor Fire as of right now. So to paint that picture, you can see where those hotspots are. You can still see some hotspots around that area north of Kirkwood. I know that's an area that they're continuing to see some of those hotspots trying to jump over the containment lines, having some new spot fires, but threatening some of the containment lines. But overall, it looks like much better conditions than this time last week. One other thing that I heard in their reports is on this northern side of the fire. One of the big things that they're doing right now is actually going in and trying to clear out a lot of the trees that were damaged by the fire. That's something not a lot of people think about, but before people can really move back into an area, one of the things they have to do is clear out a lot of the trees that were damaged, because anytime there's strong winds, those dead trees it's very easy for them to fall over. So it's just removing some of the dangerous resources or dangerous trees that were destroyed by this fire as it moved through that area. But overall, Caldor Fire looking much better than at this time last week. We can look at the fire perimeter to see where those hotspots were yesterday. Again, where they were yesterday, I'll turn off structures because it's a little hard to see. It's where you see those orange stars, so you can see that eastern finger right there, and then north of that eastern finger, that's where we did have some of those hotspots and heat activity yesterday. I did hear some reports on this little southeastern finger as well, challenging some of the containment lines. But if we look at the current heat detections, just like the Dixie Fire, it is the first time, I think, since the Caldor Fire started that we're not seeing any of those heat detections. And again, this isn't just an error with the satellite data. Again, I don't always trust this satellite data because we've seen how off it can be in the past, but we are still picking up some heat detections on the river complex and the Monument Fire. So it appears those satellites are on, they are working. We just aren't picking up any heat on the Caldor Fire as of right now. And if we want to back that up, we can look at the natural color fire here, where usually, and in the past, we were seeing areas of the Caldor Fire just glowing bright orange. You could see it based on the satellite imagery, but as of right now, you're not seeing any of those bright orange glowing areas like we were seeing in the past. So overall, great to see that on the Caldor Fire, and I'll actually show why I'm so excited to not be seeing those heat detections there. Again, this was the big story that we were following last week, and I would actually say it was, I did these update and forecast videos throughout the entire 2020 season. I've been doing them throughout this season as well, and I would say last week on the Caldor Fire it might be the most critical wildfire situation that I've personally done update and forecast for. Again, I'm fairly young, I'm new to the game, have maybe 25 to 50 more years of doing this, so I'm sure I will see more critical situations in time, but I would say that situation we were seeing last Monday and Tuesday on the Caldor Fire was the most critical event I had personally done update and forecast videos for. Again, the two main spots that we're watching, Kirkwood right here, you can see how that fire, driven by those southwesterly winds, just pushed directly to the northeast, but stayed out of Kirkwood right there. And then the even more critical spot was in Christmas Valley. Again, we were following this in real time as the spot fires jumped over Highway 50 right here, jumped on the western edge of Christmas Valley. Then it started to flare up right there, dropped some spot fires on the eastern edge of the Christmas Valley, but amazingly, they were able to keep it out of the community itself. You can see where those streets are, and then you can see where the fire perimeter just stops right before you see those streets. So again, that's why I'm so excited to see the huge reduction in heat activity on the Caldor Fire as of right now, because when we were looking at this last week, it was just about as critical as I had ever seen a wildfire, where not only had the fire pushed right up to where we had all these streets in this community like Myers and much of South Lake Tahoe where we have thousands of structures, but during that time we had 2 more days of a red flag warning where the predominant wind direction was just trying to push this fire directly into South Lake Tahoe. So unbelievable work done on the Caldor Fire by all our wildland firefighters. Still can't believe that we made it through that, but again, not completely through it as of right now. I am hesitant. I have to drive that point home because just because we don't see the heat detections right now, reading the Caldor Fire incident report, they did still have some activity on this fire throughout the day today, and we've seen how all these wildfires throughout the course of this season do like to I just see in the live chat 25 to 50 years, nice spread. It's probably closer to 50 years. I think I'm most likely going to want, this is basically what I want to do for the rest of my life, doing these update and forecast videos on California wildfires. Again, I'm a California native. That's how I got into wildfire, being evacuated from a number of fires personally. And then I've continued to follow into this field by getting my about to earn my master's in meteorology at San Jose State. My thesis is on wildfires. So and I'm also a broadcast meteorologist at KSBW. So I'm really trying to combine the media, wildfire, and weather aspects, and hopefully that'll just be exactly what I'm doing for the rest of my life, because I think it's something that is needed, where I personally know how difficult it is to find a lot of this information when these situations are developing. So I'm glad I can present this information to people who need it, and I'll be doing this for quite some time. So again, when it comes to the Caldor Fire, great to see no heat detections there, but we have seen time and time again where these fires do flare back up again, so certainly going to be keeping an eye on it. As of right now, let's actually update this, see if this number's been updated. So it looks like Caldor Fire is at 218,000 acres. Looking at the progression map, you can see where that blue color is. That's where the fire started it was the 15th and 16th, and that's when it went through Grizzly Flats. Again, lots of structures were destroyed in that area, and then the predominant wind direction was from the southwest. So you can see all of that growth we had to the northeast. The big story that we were following last week was that finger that extended north of Kirkwood, fueled by those southwesterly winds, and then also that finger that pushed directly into South Lake Tahoe, but didn't actually go into the community itself. So overall, pretty amazing to see that fire progression map, but even more amazing to see that they're able to keep it out of some of those key communities like Kirkwood, South Lake Tahoe, Myers, and Christmas Valley. Now, when it comes to the containment, happy to report we are up to 53% containment. It looks like the entire western half of the fire is fully contained, but again, I did say that they are still going into some of these areas and clearing out some of the dead trees before they completely let people back in. So hopefully more of those evacuation warnings and orders will be lifted as we move forward, but there is still some work to be done, and they do always want to mop up and make sure that they've reduced as much of the fire activity as possible. Where we are still uncontained is that area around Kirkwood. Last report that I watched said they were trying to turn that into black line right there over the next couple of days. Also, great to see that around Christmas Valley and South Lake Tahoe, that is all officially contained as of this point. So great to see that on the Caldor Fire. Now, when it comes to that area, I do just want to zoom in there so we can actually look at the containment lines themselves. You can see where those black X's are. It looks like we have it directly along the fire, and then even some backup lines. I believe they call those contingency lines, where it's almost reinforcements to make sure that fire doesn't move into South Lake Tahoe. So again, that was critical when we were watching it last week, but looks like we're doing much better on the Caldor Fire as of right now in all of our key spots. And Thank you very much, Lucy Hansen, for the super chat. Also, thank you very much to you and the rest of the moderators for doing such a great job moderating the chat, keeping it informative. Again, I'm not always the best at watching the chat, so it really helps to have the moderators keeping it informative so that if I can't answer your questions, hopefully somebody else will. So when it comes to the Caldor Fire, again, even though the heat signatures are looking much, much better than in the past, we do still have a large amount of evacuation warnings and orders in place. So just looking at the snapshot of the map, again, I don't believe this is all of the information that's important for the Caldor Fire. At one point, we did have some evacuation orders going into Nevada as well. So take this with a grain of salt, but it is good to see that that area around South Lake Tahoe seems to be transitioning into that evacuation warning category where you see the yellow color versus the red color there where it's a mandatory evacuation order. So pretty great to see that right there. We're trending in the right direction, and also looks like we're trending in the right direction when it comes to fire behavior, because as of right now, I'd say it's the least amount of fire behavior on the Caldor Fire that I've seen since I started forecasting this fire, which was about the 15th of August. So one other thing that I really want to drive home on the Caldor Fire is this structures destroyed right here. You can see it is up to 1,000 structures destroyed, but I want to combine this with their incident update from 7 p.m. tonight, where structures threatened, they do still have that number at 24,000, and then at one point right here, it's right here. So it says damage inspections are 100% complete with 3,356 structures assessed. So this was something that we've been looking for a number of days now, because again, with that red flag warning that we had last Monday and Tuesday when that fire ripped through this whole northeastern section of the fire, and we did have lots of footage coming out of new structures being destroyed. The big question mark was how many structures were destroyed and in what areas. So you can see that number is up to around 1,000. And then you can also actually look into the damage assessment map itself to see where those structures actually were destroyed. So I'll just briefly show you how to use this map. You can actually zoom into these areas where we saw a lot of that growth last week. You can go down and actually go all the way to the street view where you see the black structures. That's where there's no damage. The red structures show where there is damage, and then you can actually click on the structure itself, see a photo of it, and it's very, it hits close to home when you actually look at some of these photos, because it reminds you that we're not just looking at a map with some red dots and some black dots here and there. Again, when you actually look at those photos, it reminds you that in these areas, that's where somebody's spent their entire life, where they have all the memories, and it really shows the impact of these wildfires. So, as always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who has been affected by these wildfires. And if you are local and you're interested to know about this kind of information, again, you can find this map in the description of this video, as well as many of the other links that I've shared throughout this update. So, one good thing to see on the Cal Fire update, you can see we do still have 4,000 personnel on this fire. That's good to see, because again, with those thunderstorms that came through today where we had the reports of some new lightning fires started, I believe there was 5 new lightning fires started relatively in this area, and I did hear we had some resources pulled off the Caldor Fire, but looks like we still have a very large amount of resources still on the fire itself. So good to see that the fire behavior is going down, and we still have a very large amount of resources on the fire just in case things flare back up, and to focus on things like mop up and clearing out some of those dangerous trees that we were talking about earlier. So again, when it comes to the forecast, that trough that brought those thunderstorms has quickly moved off into Montana, and throughout the weekend we're just going to transition to a slight ridge here, which means some slightly warmer, drier conditions than we're seeing today. But overall, I wouldn't say it's one of those ridiculous ridges where we get into the huge triple digits or anything extreme right there. when it comes to the wind gust tomorrow afternoon, should be below 30 miles per hour. So overall, we will be trending towards some warmer, drier conditions, but certainly not one of those scary forecasts that we have seen in the past. And overall, I'd say it's just great to see that with that red flag warning that we did have directly over the Caldor Fire. The big question mark was how it was going to interact with those thunderstorms as they came through. There's always two sides of that coin. It can either bring new lightning fire starts and some gusty erratic winds, or it could bring some moisture and in some cases even some rainfall. And we actually saw all of that around this area throughout the day today. We had those new lightning fire starts, which pulled some resources off the Caldor Fire. We had gusty winds. I heard some reports of 40 to 60 mile per hour winds. But we also had an increase in relative humidity. And overall, I think it was that increase in humidity that helped to calm the fire down, because looking at this map where we usually see that bright orange color on the Caldor Fire, not seeing any of that right now. So good to see that with that red flag warning, that was a big question mark of what was going to happen. And it seems like we finally caught a break. I'll put it that way. So good news coming out of the Caldor Fire, and I would say the Dixie Fire as well when it came to how they were impacted by that red flag warning. Again, we did have a large amount of growth on the Dixie Fire yesterday, which led to some new evacuation orders, and I believe a lot of those are still in place, but much calmer conditions throughout the day today. Now, one other fire where we saw a massive amount of growth yesterday, again, I actually stopped covering this fire for maybe a week or two because it almost looked like it was out. And then as that red flag warning came in, and as we saw some of those thunderstorms as well, this fire just blew up yesterday. This was one of the big ones we were following yesterday afternoon. In this whole northern section of the Antelope Fire, we had a massive amount of growth. Did end up leading to some new evacuation orders. You can see how far up this northern part of the perimeter stretched, and fairly close to where we have a large amount of structures up here. So that was a new cause for alarm on the Antelope Fire, but just like the Dixie Fire and the Caldor Fire, if we look at the current GOES detections, right now we're not seeing any heat. Again, that doesn't mean that there's not still heat being generated by this fire or active parts of this fire. It just means much, much less activity than we were seeing yesterday, where there was just a huge oval of heat detections being picked up as this part of the fire was being fueled by those southwesterly winds. So great to see that on the Antelope Fire. Again, we did have some new evacuation orders put in place yesterday. I do imagine that a lot of those orders are still in effect, but when it comes to the Antelope Fire, I'd say we're looking a lot better right now than we were yesterday. Big reason for that, again, just like Caldor and Dixie, that relative humidity seemed to help calm some of the conditions throughout the day today. Antelope Fire overall is up to 143,000 acres and 63% containment. Interested to see, so we have 764 personnel on that fire as of right now. Now, again, the three fires that we've covered so far, Caldor, Dixie, and Antelope, we haven't seen any heat detections on this map, but you do notice that the satellite does appear to be working, because we do still have some heat detections occurring in the more northwestern parts of California. If we want to see exactly what those fires are, first one is the Monument Fire here, where we do still have some of that heat being picked up west of Hayfork. That's one of the top spots that I've been following for, I think, about a month now. And then it actually looks like we have some new hotspots popping up on the northwestern side of the fire. I believe that's Burnt Ranch right there. Want to make sure I'm saying that right, because, again, this is a part of the fire that hadn't flared up recently, so I want to be sure that I have my towns still right in this area. Again, seeing some of those hotspots right there. And Burnt Ranch, yeah, that's just to the south there. We also have Trinity Village right there, and Hoboken, where we are still seeing some of those hotspots outside of the previous fire perimeter. So we are going to keep a close eye on those areas as we move forward, and always keeping a close eye on Hayfork, although I do know that's one spot where I believe we've picked up a fair amount of containment in the last couple of days. So looking at the Monument Fire, we'll go to incident. You can see 207,000 acres, 42% containment. One thing that I always love to do is when you go on InstaWeb, you can go to maps and then scroll down here. And my favorite one is always the fire progression maps because it shows how the fire has been changing over time. But I also love to look at where that containment is. And this is where we have some good news for the Hayfork area. It looks like the entire northern edge of Hayfork is in that black line where we have containment. But again, where that heat signature is being picked up is on the western side over here. It looks like we have a fair bit of those black X's between where we were picking up that heat signature and Hayfork itself. But we will continue to keep a close eye on that as we move forward. Now, the other area, again, we'll just stay on the fire perimeter map. The other areas where we were seeing some of those hotspots being picked up, River Complex and the McCash Fire as well. Again, McCash is actually one that I haven't followed yet, but it does look like that's where we are picking up a fair bit of those hotspots as of right now. Quite possibly the most active wildfire in California right now. Just zooming out, yeah, it looks like that's where the satellite is currently picking up the largest amount of heat. Where you see those red or those orange dots, that is where we have structures. So again, that is a fire that we haven't followed very much in the past, but we may have to add to the list because it looks like it's possibly the most active wildfire in California as of right now. It's up to 72,000 acres and 12% containment. Just interested to see if they have maps for that one. So, looking at the containment map again, not very much containment as of this point, just 12%, but it looks like it's on the western side of that fire right there. And then just south of there is where we have the River Complex. I believe we can find it by clicking right there. River Complex is up to 175,000 acres and 21% containment. So, just summarizing this video, again, there is the big question mark of how our fires were going to interact with this red flag warning. We did see some new lightning fire starts that pulled some of our resources off of the Caldor Fire. We did end up getting those gusty winds, in some cases up to 40 to 60 miles per hour. But amazingly, our fires seem to have calmed down significantly throughout the day today. So great to see that across the state. Honestly, I would say that that is the best that California has looked in maybe 2 months since the Dixie Fire started. We certainly do still have a lot of that smoke being produced up by the McCash Fire and the Monument Fire, but that is the smallest amount of smoke that we've seen coming off of the Dixie and the Caldor, I think, since those fires began. So hopefully that is a sign for things to come and we continue to trend in that direction as we move forward. So I think that's a good place to wrap it up right there. We have those warm, dry conditions coming in this weekend, so I certainly will continue to follow these fires. We're looking good right now, but we have seen time and time again how these fires do love to flare back up right when you're not expecting it. So we are going to keep a very close eye on it. As always, thoughts and prayers go out to everybody who's been affected by these wildfires. Huge thank you to all the wildland firefighters out there, all my moderators who keep the live chat nice and informative, and also to the patrons as well. Again, if you enjoyed the audio throughout this video, you can thank the patrons on this list right here, where the money that they donated went to a new microphone. So if you like the audio, you can thank these people. And if you would like to support this channel so we can continue to improve the quality of this content, you can become a patron as well. So again, big things to follow as we move forward. This is still just the peak of wildfire season. So you can subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I will be here every step of the way as we continue to move through wildfire season. I hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching.